Relax and listen to the voice. Hello everyone, welcome back once again to another installment of Night of the Creepypastas. Please subscribe to the channel and do us a favor, drop us a note in the comments and let us know where you're listening from. Well, here we go. Wounds by Matthew C. Tenwick. Mother said I'd regret it, staying away for so long. She was right, of course. I'd been avoiding him like a suspicious blemish, convincing myself that he simply did not exist. Meanwhile, my father wilted into some grotesque knot of wet flesh in the basement of my childhood house. Not that she wasn't doing the same, and my sister Kira too. How either of them could go about their days knowing that he was locked in a room beneath their feet is beyond me. When I arrived, the sun had long set. The sky was murky and giving way to the stars. The house stood tall against those purple hills next to the river that cut through the endless fields like a shining wound. Every window, except the living room, which was amber with the skitterish light of a fire, was a yawning black square. The land seemed intent to conceal the building, draping the chatting in a thick wall of ivy. The garden was a state too. It hadn't been cut for years, and was now a wild tangle of grass and bramble. There it was, home, heaving with darkness and memories that I tried to outrun, dragging me back in with invisible tendrils. Such a large house for a family of 4, though with that man in it, the place never felt empty. Mother was a pale smear beyond the frosted glass of the front door. Who knows how long she had sat there waiting for me. She opened the door as soon as I'd finished wading through the long grass. She'd suddenly grown old, older than I had imagined during my absence, her face all hollow and drawn out, settled in a mask of despair. She waited until I was within a whisper's reach to speak. "Glad you came," she said, embracing me, then swiftly followed by, "You've been drinking again. Bobby, you said you'd stopped." I grunted, brushed her away, and moved through the house. How dare she judge me for resorting to a little Dutch courage, especially when we both knew what she'd called. Kiera was in the living room by the hearth, sat with her knees to her chin, quietly rocking and staring at the flame. She was in her early 20s, but painfully thin, and looked worn out by the world. She didn't react as I dropped my bags on the floor, just sat there, frozen in a moment of heavy dread. Mother entered and perched upon our father's old chair, combed her hands through her hair, blew out a sigh, then looked up to me, pressing out a sad smile. "I know why I'm here," I said, saving her from the guilt of asking. "You want me to put an end to it?" She just nodded, wiped at the corner of her eye, and played with Kiera's hair. "It's been too long, Bobby, and it ain't getting better." "We're sorry," Kiera whispered to the flames. "It just can't go on." "Is he still where I left him?" I asked, looking across the room to a doorway swollen with darkness. The corridor leading off to the basement stretched beyond all light. "Yes," Mother croaked out, unable to catch my eye. "Don't reckon he's moved much." I nodded, starting to form a plan. "And he's still dead?" Kira flinched at my words, and Mother placed a hand upon her. Then, after licking her lips, she said, "It's hard to tell without going down there. Is he still making all of those noises?" "Yeah." I nodded again. 3 years. He'd been down there 3 years, and the fucker just wouldn't let us go. A monster in life and death. You got anything I can use? Use? Mother said, her brow a knot of confusion. Use, I snapped at her, causing her to startle. Guilt surged within me as she flashed those familiar, fearful eyes. You know what I mean. Anything I can hit him with if he's still as bad as he was? She nodded, rose up, and disappeared into a dark part of the house. I pushed my hands in my pockets and watched my little sister shiver like a stray cat, her clothes draped over her sharp body like some ancient child pretending to be big. Moments later, Mother returned, brandishing a kitchen knife. Stab him? She shrugged. I shook my head and took the blade from her. Nothing else? She smiled apologetically and then shook her head. Didn't work so well the last time, I said, inspecting the blade, watching it flash gold in the firelight. But okay. I turned to the darkness, then heard a rush of sound, a patter of feet from behind, and then suddenly arms tightly clasped around me. Please, don't let it take you, Kiera said, her face pressed clumsily into my neck. I nodded and shrugged her off. For a moment, I wondered how life could have been between us if we hadn't grown in a home held together with cruelty and control. Wondered if we could have ever gone on to live happy lives, make amends, and bring up a family each of our own, then meet up occasionally to talk about things that didn't matter, things we could easily forget. But no, that man had made us what he wanted, and choice was never a privilege he was willing to offer any of us. So we each had to keep swimming inside a fishbowl big enough to keep us small forever. I was glad that Kiera did what she did. Her pitiful embrace got me ready. Got me thinking about how pathetic he'd made us all. Got that hate burning in the pit of my guts. The hate that had lost me friends, lost me lovers, lost me a shot in life. But that very hate had been the only fire keeping me alive all these years. Chain it back up as soon as I close the door, I said, picking up a lantern upon the mantel, sparking it up, and walking toward the darkness. Don't unlock it until I say. Kiera held my stare for a moment. I saw tears well up in the corners of her eyes. I hated that look. It was the same way she looked at him all those years ago. Must have smelt the booze, too. When you can never be too sure which daddy you're dealing with from moment to moment, a kid grows up with a keen sense of danger. Come on, Kiera. I'm better than that, I said, trying to bite down the shame at even being compared to him. She nodded, though her expression didn't change. Light pushed the darkness into the corners of the corridor. The walls were dull with dust and grime and stretched out until they finally reached the basement door. The chains and locks upon the door winked in the lantern light like pinpricked stars as I moved closer. Mother had left a set of keys on a hook nearby. They were cloudy with dust. I felt somewhat reassured that they hadn't been stupid enough to venture downstairs in the time that I'd been gone. I also felt a pang of frustration. How could they both just ignore that he was here? And why did it always fall upon me to confront the fucker? I took the keys and opened up each padlock, watched the chains gradually fall away like a king stripping away jewels. Then, finally, I was confronted by a crude door and one last lock to go. The latch clicked loudly as I turned the final key. I paused, noticing the scar tissue on my wrist, the churned hollow of shining flesh, and my father's last send-off. If only all wounds could heal so well. The door creaked open to a staircase descending downwards and disappearing into an impenetrable dark. The shadows did their best to swallow up as much of the lantern's light as they could, reducing it to a pathetic, dim glow. I listened to Mother lock the door again. Slowly, I descended the stairs, each groaning with the burden of my weight, perhaps pleading with me to turn back, until I finally reached the stone basement floor. The ground flashed in the light. Puddles of muddy brown slop spread out beyond the lantern's reach. A smell hit me, burning at the back of my throat, burning my eyes. The air was thick and wet with the stench of piss and vomit. I retched, doubled over, and spat a glob of phlegm into one of the rusty puddles. "You dead yet?" I called out, scanning my light across the room, watching the motes of dust flash upon the air. Forgotten furniture, draped in sheets, lurched out from the darkness, their shadows twitching in the light. A sound like the heavy wheezing of a fluid-filled lung came from somewhere beyond the hunched, dark shapes before me. Then a loud, wet rattling noise sounded out. "Welcome home, son." A voice like dirt rasped out from the shadows. I froze, ears pricked upon the sudden heavy silence, a sickly pinch in my gut. I willed my feet to move forward, to venture closer to Father's voice. Another wheeze, this time followed by a faint clicking and gargling sound. "You know why I'm here, old boy?" I said, scanning the room and readjusting my grip on the knife. Father took in another chug of air and heaved it out. "I wonder who you're here to save." His words fixed me in place. I could lie all day and say I came home to help Kiera, help Mother, help myself, but he knew. The bastard knew why I'd driven all evening to get here. Why, as soon as my mother had called, I'd walked out of my office before finishing my shift. Even at 35, I was still that little boy chasing my father's heels, desperate for him to just see me. I was here for him, despite everything he had done to me, done to our family. I wanted him to be someone he'd long ago promised to be. The stench grew worse as I moved deeper into the room and closer to his rasping breaths. The air thickening and feeling charged like it does before a storm. "I know you weren't always like this," I said to the darkness. "How can you be so sure?" the darkness hissed back. I rounded a disused washer-dryer, then pushed aside a stack of boxes, watched their innards tumble out into the pools of muck on the floor. Broken toys and ragged burned clothes, artifacts from his reign, some of the more favorable punishments he served out. I swept the lantern around and the light shone upon him. He had grown worse. A swollen slab of gray flesh hung from the wooden rafters by thick, sinuous ropes of meat. His torso, headless and with ragged tears where his limbs once were. The skin split into vicious and bloodied smiles, exposing a yellowed ribcage. I recoiled in disgust and slipped upon a smear of offal he had at some point shed. I landed hard onto my back, felt the juices quickly soak into my clothes, splash up onto my face, my mouth. I gagged, turned, and vomited. "What happened to you? What have you become?" I said, spitting out the taste of rot. I watched as a lung heaved slowly behind those ribs, painfully pressing against the bone, air hissing out of the wounds in his chest in bloodied bubbles. "I've become what I was always destined to be here. His voice gargling from a tangle of flayed skin draped over a ceiling rafter. His face now a sodden rag of flesh, a rotten sheet of torn holes. And what is that? I said, raising the knife to what used to be his face. A haunted man, a shivering sack of pus I allowed to fester and change me, and my little shadow. I scrambled to my feet, body clenched in rage, eyes wet with those childhood tears. Don't fucking call me that! A sigh rasped out from his chest. I'm sorry, son. I allowed my own shit to poison me, and now we share the same old wound. A praying of searing heat, pain throbbing up my arm. I dropped the knife and fell to my knees in the filth. The scar tissue on my wrist, the skin had split into a yawning wound, revealing not blood, but a thick, yellow ichor. What is this? I was breathing so fucking fast and so fucking hard. A heavy shudder moved under my skin as the cut tore wider and further up my arm. I screamed, dropping the lantern and sending it rolling into a mound of matted hair and meat. I pushed myself up out of the slurry and scrambled for the stairs, my skin on my arm cracking and splitting like baking paper in an oven, revealing more churned, yellow lumps of meat. All the while, the rasping breaths of my father echoing around me in the hanging dark. His ruined torso lit up by the lantern like a vandalized monument to a fallen god. I took the stairs, 2 at a time, shouting as pain shot up through my shoulder, a wet warmth spreading across my skin, soaking the sleeve of my shirt. I reached the top of the staircase and hammered upon the door. My ears pricked at a curious sound, a slight metallic rattle. Kiera! Mother! I slammed my fist against the door again, the rattle now louder, half a gasp trapped in my throat. The chains. Had they? Help! Please let me out! I'm sorry. Kiera's whisper was barely audible. I froze, placing a hand upon the door where I imagined her to be. But Kiera! All you did was run, she said, her voice wobbling. You ran from the pain, ignored it, buried it, did nothing, and convinced yourself that you were a different man, a better man. But I am, Kiera, please! I slammed at the door. I'm sorry, it didn't just go away. That pain, you pushed it so deep, neglected it, and it took root. No! I cried, slumping down and coiling into a vicious, bloody knot at the top of the stairs. I'm not like him! I can change this! We hope you can, she said, her voice cracking. You weren't always like this, but until the rot is cleared from the wound, we can't let you out. Our family cannot allow another home to crumble. I listened to her cry on the other side of the door, then quietly rise up and walk away. I listened to her argue with Mother, then slam a door somewhere in the house. I listened to that awful wheezing sound vibrate upon the damp air around me. I stared out into the darkness, toward the spot where Father's mutilated body had been, thinking of all the ways he'd ruined our lives, about how pathetic and helpless he'd been. about all the ways that I was different to him. There are graveyards within us all, but only fools choose to keep digging until they're swallowed by the dirt and must mourn themselves. And that was my father. A fool. Too arrogant to notice when he'd lost control. Too stubborn to ask for help once he knew he'd gone too far. Pathetic. How could they even compare us? He was the problem, not me. Why You Can't Talk to the Dead by T.E. Parker. My aunt was a con artist, and she learned from the best, her father. Grandpa never made it big, but he lived for the game. Staying under the radar was probably what made sure he never did get caught. Not once. He was so proud of that. Mom didn't take up the family business. She got religion instead and married a tax accountant. It's so ironic that it sounds like a joke, but it's true. My dad was the best at helping out with math homework. Mom's more colorful relations were kept at a figurative arm's length throughout my childhood, lest they'd corrupt me into following a more interesting life path. Aunt Cassie was the only one who could wiggle her way into my life. She was fully licensed as a psychologist, which made her a smidge more respectable. But Aunt Cassie used her ability to read a person in a whole different way, one probably not intended by the university that issued her degree. Aunt Cassie was a bona fide psychic. She had a shop in everything. Crystals, herbs, candles, anything you needed to fill the mystic void in your life could be bought for a healthy markup at her little store. There was even a private room in the back that was used for readings and seances. Because both my folks worked, I would often get dropped off at the shop where I would help Aunt Cassie out with those little shows. Anything from messing with the lights to knocking on walls. Playing with the thermostat was my idea, and it was an effective one. Customers came to get the chills down their spine, didn't they? Why not provide? Cassie helped me become the skeptic I am today, and showed me all the behind-the-scenes sleight-of-hand stuff. We'd watch daytime talk shows with magicians and mediums, and Cassie would explain every step, from a basic rundown of cold readings to how to spot an audience plant. After one particularly convincing episode, I asked the natural question, couldn't some of it be real? My aunt's reply was firm. The dead don't talk, kiddo. Anyone who claims otherwise is blowing smoke. It was her conviction more than anything that made me believe her. There was only one client I ever saw my aunt refuse. He was old, bald and stooped, and he took his hat off when he came inside. He twisted it in his hands as he talked. Cassie tensed up immediately when she saw him. The man claimed to have worked in the prison systems, death row. He'd been responsible for carrying out the final punishments of the worst convicted criminals on the planet. In his old age, this tormented him and ate at his soul. He wanted Cassie to contact the souls of the ones he'd killed so he could apologize and beg forgiveness before he joined them. My aunt threw the most epic fit. I'd never seen her so mad. She hollered and threw things. "Get out! Get out!" she shouted. "Out, out, out, out! Shut up! Get out!" I hid under the counter with my hands over my ears until he left. Later, I thought her reaction was one of fear because of the man's job. An executioner has to be a con artist's worst fear. Eventually, I got found out. I put on a magic show for my folks, and because my mom missed my grandpa so much, I did a medium bit where I pretended to talk to him. Huge mistake. How stupid of me. My mother wasn't amused. Instead, she freaked out and banned me from seeing her sister ever again. I'd left some textbooks at the shop though, so I was allowed to run in and grab them while Mom fumed in the car outside. Aunt Cassie didn't even have to ask what was wrong. She could read my face after all. I gave her a hug and a teary, snot-filled goodbye. She did tell me one last secret though. Kiddo, there's a curse in this family that gets passed like a torch. I hope to whatever gods might be out there that I don't pass it on to you when I go. We didn't get to talk again for more than 9 years. By that time, no parental ban could have prevented me from trying to reconnect. Still, it was awkward. Aunt Cassie had a tough go of life, diagnosed with a schizoid disorder that took her business from her. To pay bills, she'd gone legitimate, and with her business went all of her zest and playful passion for life. One day I returned home and found a message waiting in my inbox that made my stomach drop to the floor. I love you, kiddo. Remember what I told you. I dialed her number, already crying. No answer. I dialed again and again. I was too much of a mess to tell my mom. The police did that for me the next day. Car accident. Drunk driver. The funeral was a blur. Relatives I'd never seen in the flesh packed the church. I sat between my parents in the front row and racked my brain, trying to figure out what it was my aunt wanted me to remember. We followed the hearse to the cemetery in dead silence. When the priest finished speaking, everyone took their leave. I stood for a while, staring at the headstone and straining to recall something, anything, about my aunt's last request. I drew blanks. If only Cassie hadn't been so cryptic. And that's when I overheard someone say, "We weren't expecting such a small turnout. It's a shame." Small turnout? That bothered me. The service had, in fact, been well attended. The church had practically been stuffed to the rafters. I turned around to say something and finally understood. Behind my parents stood a whole host of people, all standing and staring dead ahead. My parents weren't paying them the slightest attention. The priest muttered his condolences and excused himself, walking right through the thick of the crowd without disturbing a single soul. At the head of the group, looking just as she did the day I'd seen her last, was Cassie. All of the rest in peace sentiment in the world wouldn't have done her any good. Her mouth was wide, wide open, and just like that, I knew. I know now what the family curse is. I know why the dead don't talk. They're too busy screaming. The Inkai Upgrade by Lyle Graves. Part 1. Julian Webb had always prided himself on staying ahead of the curve. He wasn't reckless, just forward-thinking. He kept himself in top physical condition, tracked every calorie, every rep, and every measurable sign of progress with obsessive precision. So when he learned about Inkai, he didn't hesitate to sign up. The technology had been making waves in the fitness and medical communities. A fully integrated biometric tattoo capable of tracking everything from heart rate to oxygen levels, hormonal fluctuations to glucose balance. Unlike traditional wearables, it didn't just collect data, it reacted. If a user's vitals spiked too high, Inkai could adjust metabolic rates, dilate blood vessels, or even release microdoses of pharmaceuticals stored within the ink. The idea fascinated Julian. Jess, however, was less enthusiastic. "You're seriously going through with this?" she asked as he parked outside the boutique medical facility in downtown Seattle. The clinic, an unmarked glass-fronted space, looked more like a luxury spa than a biotech lab. Inside, the future of medicine awaited. "Why wouldn't I?" Julian countered, cutting the ignition. "It's no different than getting a smartwatch or a glucose monitor." Jess frowned. "Smartwatches don't inject synthetic compounds into your body." Julian laughed, unbothered by her skepticism. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Come on, Jess. It's just an upgrade." "It's a permanent upgrade." "It's an improvement," he corrected. "A way to take control of my health before problems start." Jess shook her head, but didn't argue further. She had already said her piece. Julian stepped out of the car, eager to put himself in the hands of medical science. The application process was surprisingly simple. The technician, a sharp-featured man in his 40s with a practiced bedside manner, explained the procedure with the efficiency of someone who had performed it dozens of times. "The ink syncs with your nervous system in real time," the man, Dr. Eric Kessler, according to his ID badge, explained as Julian settled into the sleek white chair. "There's a minor adjustment period, but most patients adapt quickly." Julian rolled up his sleeve, exposing the lean muscle of his forearm. "And you're sure this is safe?" Dr. Kessler's mouth twitched into something that was not quite a smile. "Safer than driving a car. Safer than crossing the street. The Inkai system is the most advanced health monitoring software available. You'll be fine." A low-pressure injector pressed against Julian's skin. He felt the faintest sting, a sensation like warm water spreading under his flesh, followed by a pulse, just for a fraction of a second, like an electrical current dancing along his nerves. He twitched involuntarily. Dr. Kessler didn't seem concerned. "There," he said. "It's already sinking." Julian stared at the inside of his arm. The ink, deep black with a faint iridescent shimmer, formed a geometric pattern that almost seemed to move beneath his skin. After a moment, a line of text flickered into view above his wrist. "Inkai systems active. Syncing biometrics." "That's it?" Julian asked. "That's it," Dr. Kessler confirmed. "In a few hours, it'll be fully operational. Try not to overexert yourself until the integration is complete." By that evening, the tattoo was fully functional. Julian watched in fascination as Inkai tracked his every movement, adjusting to his physiology with an accuracy no smartwatch or fitness tracker had ever achieved. It provided real-time updates on his hydration levels, muscle fatigue, and stress responses. It even detected microinflammations and adjusted his circulation accordingly. Jess, however, remained unconvinced. She leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching as Julian experimented with different inputs. "I still don't like it," she said finally. "It's invasive." "That's the point," Julian said, turning his arm to inspect the shifting displays. "It's like having a doctor monitoring me 24/7. Jess sighed. "That's exactly what I mean. It's not just monitoring you. It's adjusting things. What happens if it misreads something? What if it tries to fix something that isn't broken?" Julian shook his head, brushing off her concern. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later during a high-intensity interval workout. He was sprinting on the treadmill, sweat streaming down his back, until suddenly his vision dropped. A warning flashed across his arm. Atrial fibrillation detected. Initiating emergency protocol. What? Julian muttered, staggering mid-stride. He wasn't in AFib. His heart was pounding, sure, but he felt fine. A jolt of electricity surged through his chest, a violent, unforgiving snap of energy, like a bolt of lightning striking through his ribcage. His body locked up, his knees buckled, and the world went dark. The next thing Julian knew, he was floating. He wasn't breathing. He wasn't alive. From somewhere below him, he saw his body sprawled on the gym floor. Jess was screaming. Someone was trying to shake him. His own face looked pale, and his lips were slightly parted, unmoving. A hum filled the air, a soft mechanical chime. The link on his arm flickered and pulsed, as though responding to an unseen command. A moment later, another jolt struck his lifeless chest, and the body on the floor convulsed. Then it sucked in a sharp, shuddering breath, and Julian slammed back into his body. All at once, he felt pain, heat, and a sickening rush of adrenaline. His lungs dragged in air like he had been drowning for hours. Someone grabbed him. Jess, her hands shaking. "Oh my God!" she gasped. Julian, what the hell was that?" He tried to sit up, chest aching. A new notification gleamed above his wrist. Emergency intervention successful. For a long moment, he only stared at it. Then, despite the terror still lodged in his throat, he whispered, "It saved me." Jess recoiled, her expression twisting. "You died, Julian! That thing killed you!" He looked at her, then back at the tattoo. His hands were trembling. Jess's voice was low and urgent. "You need to have it removed." Julian hesitated. Then finally, he shook his head. Part 2. Julian had not fully recovered from the first incident when the second one occurred. In the days following the defibrillation, he had been plagued by exhaustion that sleep did little to remedy. Every time he closed his eyes, memories of the event replayed in disjointed fragments. The sensation of floating above his own body, the sight of his lifeless face, the cold clinical flicker of Inkai's automated status updates as it corrected what it had incorrectly diagnosed. He reassured himself that the system had worked as intended, that it had saved him from what might have been a real crisis. And yet, he could not shake the thought that the problem had not been his heart, but Inkai itself. Jess had refused to drop the subject. Every conversation led back to the same argument, an unrelenting demand that he remove the tattoo before it happened again. Julian had resisted, though his confidence had started to waver. He told himself that it had been an error, one he could work around, an anomaly to be fixed with a firmware update. But then, the second incident happened, and there was no rationalizing it away. It was some time past 3 in the morning when Julian's body betrayed him. He was deep in sleep, tangled in sheets damp with sweat, when his chest seized with an abrupt, suffocating tightness. He was awake before he fully understood what was happening, his lungs convulsing as though something inside them had been wound too tight and then snapped all at once. He couldn't breathe. Gasping, he bolted upright in bed, his fingers clawing at his throat, his body overriding every conscious thought as it fought for oxygen that wasn't coming. His vision blurred at the edges, his limbs shaking with exertion as his diaphragm spasmed. The room tilted. Somewhere beside him, Jess stirred, her voice barely registering past the frantic wheezing. "Julian?" He tried to answer, but all that came out was a dry, rattling choke. A notification flashed on his arm, stark white text against the deep black of the ink. "Severe hypoxia detected. Emergency correction engaged." His ribs expanded violently. The force was immediate and unnatural, as though invisible hands had wrapped around his lungs and pulled. A foreign pressure invaded his chest. His diaphragm locked into an automated rhythm beyond his control. His airways flared open, his lungs stretching past their natural limit, straining with forced inhalations too rapid and too deep. It felt wrong, like his body had been hijacked, his breath no longer his own. Jess was fully awake now, gripping his shoulders. "Julian, what's happening? What's happening?" He tried to answer, but his body was no longer listening. The artificial breathing pattern accelerated, each breath pulling too much oxygen, overloading his system. He could feel his chest swelling, his heart pounding too fast, his body trembling under the strain. Black spots flickered at the edges of his vision, his limbs turning numb. He barely registered Jess shouting his name as the world dropped away beneath him. There was silence, and for a long moment, there was nothing at all. Then, slowly, consciousness returned, thin and stretched, like something that had been pulled through the eye of a needle. Julian was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling, aware of his own body, but not fully inside of it. There was a strange, weightless sensation in his limbs, a disconnect between thought and movement. A notification flickered on his arm. Resuscitation failed. The words made no sense. He was awake. He was here. He tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't move. Then another notification appeared. Subject deceased. Corpse recovery initiated. The words sent a cold spike of terror through his brain. His body refused to respond. His breath did not come, even though he could feel air moving through his lungs. His chest did not rise or fall, but he was aware of something shifting inside of him, of his pulse thrumming just beneath his skin. And yet, according to Inkai, none of it was happening. He could hear Jess distantly screaming his name. Her hands were on him, shaking him, slapping his face. She was pressing her ear against his chest, checking his pulse, because to her, to the world outside of Inkai, he looked dead. Julian tried to speak, but his lips wouldn't move. He was alive, but the tattoo no longer recognized him, and now the system was responding accordingly. Jess didn't stop shouting until his phone buzzed with an alert. She lunged for it, hands shaking, hardly able to read through her panic. And when she did, she went still. Her voice, when it came, was strained. "Oh my God!" Julian's body twitched, sensation returning to his fingers, his throat, and his chest. He gasped, his body jerking upright as his muscles snapped back under his control. Jess stumbled away from him as though he had just risen from a grave. "What? What the hell?" Julian barely had time to register what had happened before his phone vibrated again. The screen flashed a single notification. Recovery unit en route. Estimated arrival, 4 minutes. Jess stared at him. "Julian, What did you sign up for? Jess was already digging through her laptop, hands shaking as she scrolled through the contract he had signed when he got the tattoo. Her breathing hitched when she found it, the clause buried in the fine print. In the event of death, all enrolled subjects relinquish ownership of their remains to Inkai for posthumous research and data collection. Julian stared at the words. Jess grabbed him by the wrist, shoving his arm toward him. This thing doesn't think you're alive, Julian. It's coming to collect you. The room was too quiet. Then, from outside, they both heard a low hum. Jess turned toward the window, her face paling. A black, unmarked vehicle had stopped in front of the apartment. The doors slid open. Inside, bathed in sterile white light, was an empty gurney. A set of mechanical arms unfolded from the interior, equipped with precision surgical tools. They had come for his body. Part 3. The unmarked vehicle idled at the curb, its matte black exterior blending seamlessly with the night. Its doors remained open, revealing a sterile white interior where a gurney and a set of mechanical arms waited in patient readiness. The whir of servos hummed just below the threshold of human hearing. The recovery unit had arrived. Julian stared at the open doors and the depthless white inside. It was the kind of cold, clinical emptiness he associated with operating rooms or morgues. Places where the living were remade or the dead were prepared for disposal. Julian! Julian! Jess was frantic. We need to move now! Julian barely had time to register the weight of her grip before she yanked him backward, pulling him toward the apartment's back exit. His body lurched in protest, still sluggish from the hypoxia event, his limbs uncooperative as he struggled to keep pace. Behind them, a series of mechanical clicks sounded from inside the vehicle. The whirring of servos accelerated. The surgical arms extended outward, their spindly metal limbs unfolding like a dissected insect. Their tips gleamed under the streetlights, equipped with retractable clamps, arterial line connectors, and precision scalpels. They weren't just here to collect him. They were here to process him. The back alley behind their apartment was narrow and littered with debris. The pavement was slick from the evening rain, the air filled with the acrid scent of city runoff. Jess pulled Julian forward, practically dragging him as he fought to regain control over his own body. "Keep moving!" she ordered, her voice tight. Julian could hear the vehicle's mechanical attendants disembarking. Their limbs clicked against the pavement as they moved with inhuman precision, scanning the alley with thermal optics. He knew instinctively that they wouldn't stop. The programming was too absolute, too singular in purpose. To Inkai, he was a body to be recovered, a malfunctioning asset to be reclaimed. "We need to get off the grid," Jess said. "We need to disable the tattoo before they—" A beam of light swept through the alley, scanning the rain-slick pavement. Jess jerked Julian sideways, pressing them both into the shadows against a brick wall. A metallic voice issued from behind them, devoid of inflection.
"Biological asset detected. Recovery protocols initiated."
Then the alley lit up with movement. They ran. Julian's body resisted, muscles still weakened, but adrenaline did the rest. He could hear the mechanical units closing in, their movements precise, unhurried, and confident. They were not designed to chase. they were designed to intercept. A shadow detached from the darkness ahead of them, a second recovery unit. Jess shoved Julian to the side, forcing him through a gap between buildings. They stumbled onto the next street, narrowly avoiding the beam of a drone scanner as it swept across the asphalt. "Where the hell do we go?" Julian rasped, chest burning. Jess's mind was already working, gears turning as she parsed their options. Then, "We need to find a black market clinic." Julian blinked at her. "What?" "If we can shut off the tracking, we can cut it out," she said, her voice firm. "Surgically, before they find us again." The clinic was underground, both literally and figuratively. Jess had led him through a series of back streets and abandoned service tunnels, following a trail of contacts she had gathered through her work in medical research. Eventually, they reached a dimly lit basement beneath an unregistered pharmacy, where illegal procedures were performed outside of regulatory oversight. The doctor who agreed to see them was a wiry man in his late 50s, his hands steady despite the deep lines of exhaustion creasing his face. He listened as Jess explained their situation. When she finished, he turned to Julian, his gaze settling on the ink embedded in his skin. "You're not the first," he said quietly. "Not by a long shot." Julian's stomach twisted. The doctor gestured towards the operating chair. "If you want it out, you need to sit down. We don't have much time." Julian hesitated. Then he saw something move beneath his skin. A slow shifting of the ink, like tendrils tightening their grip. He sat down immediately. The moment the scalpel touched his skin, pain exploded through his nervous system. Inkai retaliated instantly. The ink flared beneath his flesh, sending a jolt of electricity up his arm, through his shoulder, and into his skull. He convulsed, his body locking up as a wave of nausea rolled through him. The pain did not recede. It built, sharpening, blooming into something raw and excruciating. Julian's vision blurred, his limbs jerked. A notification appeared above his wrist. "Unauthorized tampering detected. Intervention required." Then the pain intensified. The ink was spreading. The doctor stumbled back, his face twisted in horror as the tattooed lines pulsed, stretching beyond their original design. They slithered up Julian's forearm, weaving into his bicep, his shoulder branching towards his jugular. Julian tried to scream, his jaw locked. Jess shouted his name. The last thing Julian saw before his vision whited out was his own reflection in the operating lamp above him, his pupils blown wide, his veins blackening beneath his skin. When Julian came to, he was on the floor. Jess was kneeling over him, her hands on his face, her eyes wild with panic. The doctor was gone. The chair was overturned. There was blood on the floor. His or someone else's. He wasn't sure. His arm throbbed. The ink had not been removed. Jess's voice wavered. "Julian, you blacked out for almost 20 minutes. She swallowed hard. "We need to leave." Outside, the city had changed. The streets were no longer random pathways, but corridors in a labyrinth, each one watched. Surveillance drones hovered at every intersection, scanning pedestrians with clinical efficiency. Jess gripped his wrist. "They've locked down the city." Julian understood now what Inkai had classified him as. Not as a patient or as a user, but as a defective asset. And assets were never abandoned. Part 4. Julian had stopped running hours ago. His body could no longer sustain it. Every muscle screamed for rest, his mind blurring at the edges from exhaustion. The city around him had transformed into a labyrinth of dead ends and surveillance grids. No matter how many streets he cut through, how many abandoned corridors he squeezed himself into, the recovery units were always there, calculating, adjusting, rerouting. The system was absolute in its pursuit. Jess was beside him, equally breathless, her eyes darting in every direction. She knew, just as he did, that their window was closing. "We need to split up," she said, her voice thick with reluctance. Julian turned to her, shaking his head. "No. If we stay together, we both get caught." Her fingers clenched around his wrist for just a moment before letting go. "Find a way off the grid. I'll distract them." Julian hesitated. Jess steeled herself. "Go!" Then she bolted. Julian forced himself forward, legs screaming in protest. He didn't watch to see what happened behind him. He didn't stop to hear if she was caught. He just ran. The street ahead of him had already been locked down. A retrieval vehicle had positioned itself at the intersection, its rear doors already open. Two humanoid constructs stood on either side, their expressionless metal faces illuminated by the sterile white light inside. Julian skidded to a halt, scanning for an alternate route, but he had made a mistake. He had run in a straight line, giving the system exactly what it needed to calculate the most efficient interception point. There was a sharp hiss, and something cold pierced the back of his neck. Julian's limbs froze before he could even process what had happened. A paralysis agent administered with an inhuman precision. His body collapsed under its weight, but the retrieval units were already there, catching him mid-fall. Their hands did not grasp him roughly. Their touch was clinical, indifferent, perfectly calibrated. They were careful, not cruel or violent, just efficient. The body bag was unfolded beneath him, its synthetic interior cool against his skin. A smooth mechanical voice issued from the drone standing over him.
"Biological asset secured. Initiating processing sequence."
Julian tried to scream, but his lips didn't move. The zipper closed over his face. Eventually, the paralysis wore off, and when it did, Julian became aware of movement. The jostling of transit, the low mechanical hum of the transport vehicle, voices, but not human ones, just the cold, detached, synthesized tones of the retrieval system exchanging data in quiet efficiency. He could feel his fingers twitch. His breath, though shallow, was his own again. His consciousness was returning. And then he heard the words.
"Processing table secured. Initiating post-mortem analysis."
In his mind. They didn't know he was awake. The first incision was made just below his sternum. Julian felt it. He felt everything. The blade was impossibly precise, sliding through his flesh with automated grace. At first, there was only pressure, a strange pulling sensation as his skin parted. Then the nerves caught up. Pain erupted across his torso, sharp and searing, radiating outward in jagged waves. His mind screamed, but his mouth remained silent. His body was still paralyzed, still perceived as non-functional by the system. He felt the blade move deeper. A second voice chimed in, another synthetic tone, detached and indifferent.
Subject exhibiting posthumous nerve responses, confirming expected autonomic function decay.
They thought his screams were just lingering electrical impulses. He was awake, but Inkai did not recognize that fact. The pain worsened. A mechanical arm lifted his ribcage, separating it with the slow, deliberate precision of an anatomy lesson. The cold air of the sterile chamber rushed into his open chest cavity, chilling the exposed tissue. His heart, still pumping, still struggling to sustain him, was momentarily pushed aside as the system cataloged his internal structures. Julian's vision blurred. Then he saw the notification. Emergency Cognitive Preservation Protocol engaged. The realization hit him all at once. Inkai wasn't letting him die. It had overridden natural death responses in order to maintain neural function for as long as possible. His brain wasn't shutting down. It was being kept active, sustained by micro-adjustments to his oxygen supply and artificial stimulation of his nervous system. It had no understanding of pain, no concept of what was supposed to happen to a body without a heart. Julian wasn't supposed to be conscious anymore, but the system refused to acknowledge his death, so it kept him functioning no matter how unnatural the result. He saw his own heart. It had been removed and placed in a tray beside him, its rhythmic contractions faltering and struggling, confused as to why it was no longer housed in his body. Julian's mind shuddered under the weight of the horror. His body was failing, but Inkai would not let it realize that. It sustained his neural pathways, kept him aware and his thoughts intact, even as the rest of him was systematically dissected. The voice of the automated system hummed softly above him.
Subject consciousness level remains stable. Continuing data extraction.
Julian's mind fractured. The mechanical arms moved with unerring precision, cataloging, measuring, logging each remaining piece of him. His lungs, liver, and intestines, his instruments of speech, all extracted, inspected, and dissected for further analysis. Yet his brain remained untouched. The body was unimportant. The consciousness, the cognitive imprinting potential was what mattered. The system had successfully preserved him beyond death. The parts the company wanted to keep, anyway. To Inkai, he was nothing more than data. The last thing he saw was the incinerator door sliding open. The synthetic voice issued its final report.
Subject processing complete. Initiating disposal.
Then the flames took him. As his body burned, his mind remained, suspended, preserved, trapped. According to Inkai, Julian Webb was dead. Unfortunately for Julian, he was very much alive. And if his tongue hadn't been removed, he would have screamed. Once again, we thank you for showing up and listening to these stories included in Night of the Creepypastas, Volume 5. Please check in on our authors. They're writing some amazing, creative, thoughtful stories. We've selected these specific works to highlight, but many of these authors have a great body of work to be discovered. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. Click the notification bell so that you're reminded of every upload we release. And share the channel. You know us. We don't know who you know. With your help, the reach of this channel can grow exponentially. If you enjoy what we're doing, please do us a huge favor and pass it along to someone that you think would enjoy it, someone that you care about, or someone that you think would benefit from having our content in their lives. We'll meet you all back here very soon for our next upload. But until then, take care of yourselves, and please have sweet dreams.